In order to understand, we must peel back the layers of time and try to separate fact from fiction.
A planted seed will grow.
And hearsay turns into stories.
Those stories go back and forth, and little bits are added each time. And before you know it, you've got one hell of a story. But that's all it is, a story. And without any proof to back it up, that's all it's ever gonna be.
In 1351, King Edward III gave charter to a 3-day celebrated fair in the settlement of Boughton.
It took place on a green of 17 acres on the 24th, 25th and 26th of June annually. Once famed for brooms and woodenware, the last day was reserved for pleasure and sports such as stick fighting and wrestling.
But over many lifetimes the fair began to decline, and the pleasure was given to large cattle fairs. It was abolished during World War I.
But there is one particular person that keeps Boughton Green Fair alive. But we will talk more about him later.
This land is the old village green of Boughton, and the settlement stood all the way around it, with the church of St John and the graveyard being directly opposite.
St John the Baptist, whose name accompanies both the church and the spring in the graveyard.
The church was a 14th century date and consisted of chancel, north chapel, a nave and a west tower with spire.
In the 16th century, the rabbits invaded the churchyard, making it so dangerous that the villagers were afraid to go to mass for fear of breaking their necks.
Due to the rabbits tunnelling and burrowing, some bones were exposed.
The tower and spire stood until about 1785.
St John's Church, Boughton, is a place that seems to have a lot of unrevealed mysteries. A place of dissolution and decline, and yet the most beautiful.
The ancient parish church lies in ruin, a few lifetimes away from its once thriving settlement and its famed fair, lost and forgotten in time. St John's Spring, which once provided the element for the holy rite of baptism and in later years supplied the water for the culinary purposes at the fair,
still flows and trickles away. The church and its graveyard seems to be filled with pockets of different stories. Some want to keep these stories alive. Or is there actually some truth to these stories? After all, there is no smoke without fire. It is regularly visited by ghost hunters and is said to be one of the most haunted places in the UK. Historical records are bleak, and the further back in time you go, the bleaker they become. So we have to rely on logic and try to piece together the story from the many versions that are out there.
Some of its stories are mysteriously untraceable, as if to be a myth of deeper meaning.
local couple got married at the church on Christmas Eve. The marriage was short-lived though, as a couple of weeks later, the groom suddenly passed away, being so grief-stricken. The bride just couldn't live without him, and she ended her life at his graveside. Suicide in them days was considered a sin, and therefore she was unable to be buried in the churchyard with her husband due to it being consecrated ground, and consequently she is said to haunt by the gates, forever searching for her lost love. But beware if you do come across her. According to stories, she entices male passers-by for a kiss, and whoever takes her up on the offer is doomed to die within 1 month. And that was the fate of a young farmer called William Parker, who on Christmas Eve in 1785 was on his way back from the pub in Malton, and as he reached the perimeter of the graveyard, he noticed sat on the wall was a pretty red-haired lady. She beckoned him to come over and sit with her. They parted with a kiss and agreed to meet each other 1 month later at the same place.
There is also reports that a man supposedly murdered his partner,
and as punishment was hung from the bough of a giant tree.
It is said that his body was left there to disintegrate, and over time crows pecked at the carcass. We cannot find any historical records to actually verify this.
Children are also said to haunt the graveyard, and an apologetic spirit that says it's sorry over and over again. This is normally captured by EVP. A man in a flat cap is seen wandering up by the church gates and around the perimeter. The church is also said to have links with satanic worship.
It would be rude not to mention the most famous highwayman of North Northamptonshire, Mr. George Catherall, 29, from Bolton in Lancashire, was an ex-mercenary soldier and a prize fighter.
A tall, tough villain with a bad back due to many militant encounters.
He had been in town for a while, committing several robberies. He soon got a name for himself, and that name was Captain Slash. The crime that was George Catherall's downfall was committed as Boughton Fair was closing on the 26th of June 1826.
Catherall and a gang member called Hugh Robinson robbed James Henley.
Where Catherall acted alone in robbing a James Hannell of £1 in silver.
Both George Catherall and Hugh Robinson were arrested and tried at Northampton County Jail, and they were both found guilty of robbery and assault. They were both sentenced to death, but Hugh Robinson, then aged 19, later had his sentence changed to life in prison. George Catherall's execution was to take place on the 21st of July 1826 at the New Drop, Northampton.
Just before George Catherall faced his final curtain, he kicked his boots into the crowd, apparently in defiance of his mother, who said he would die with his boots on.
He thrashed around for a few minutes before his energy of life was drained forever. His lifeless body was approached by several females who wiped their warts and went upon him. Apparently, he was buried the very same day, just up the road on the north side of St Giles Churchyard. As for Hugh Robinson, we can only find one death record of about 3 years later, in 1829. The rest is unknown.
Captain Captain Slash is meant to haunt Boughton Green and the Spinney. He moans and howls.